Hello everyone! Tunnel books are very beautiful and much admired, so I thought maybe you'd like to learn how to make an illustrated Christmas poem tunnel book for a keepsake for this year, just using your die cutting machine and your stash of dies. First of all, choose your poem. I'm taking The Oxen by Thomas Hardy, which is a lovely poem, and obviously the scene that I'm going to be doing is a nativity scene. You can be really creative with your dies using your card stacks and partial die cutting. Now I'm going to be using my 12-inch Gemini machine, but a manual machine works just as well. I recommend the bigger machines because you can move your dies around in more space, but if you only have a standard 6-inch machine, just adjust the size of your cards and dies. You can make a beautiful keepsake that is also a decoration because it's going to be LED backlit. So just remember, you can make as many panels as you like, but ensure that your figures are the largest at the front and the smallest at the back. So here I've got the smallest king and camel behind the nativity scene. For the first two panels I'm working back to front. In front of that I'm going to be putting the other kings and the remaining camel, and I've been using partial die cutting and then free cutting the ground because I want it to be undulating. You can partially die cut your camel so that just half of it shows. In front of that I've got a shepherd and a sheep in a field, and then in front of that I've of course got the slightly larger but very important donkey, and in front of him is going to be the all-important oxen, and he's the biggest I've got, so he's right at the front. And then I've made a front piece to frame them all. You can keep it really simple or make it absolutely complicated, your choice entirely. In this project I'm using A5 card, and I'm going to show you some of my panels just to demonstrate the tips of making those dies work creatively for you. Now in this first panel I've cut out the frame, but I want it actually to be taller, so I need to extend the die cut. So I'm measuring the distance from the bottom, and once I've done that I am going to be positioning some of my old birthday and Christmas cards of the right size over the top to the level I want it to cut, and I'm just building up my stash until I've got as many cards, usually about 8 in this case, to put the top cover over and then run it through my machine. Obviously it depends on the size of your cards how many you need. The net result is that when I take the cards off and untape it, I've got an extended die cut, and I just trim any bits where I haven't lined things up absolutely straight. The next tip I wanted to show you was how to repurpose dies. I needed an oxen for this scene and I didn't have one, or a suitable cow die at all, and I wasn't able to get one. So what I did was I had a sitting reindeer that I felt would fit the bill quite well. So I partially die cut it out, just taking off its tail end and leaving that in the side, building up my card stacks, making sure they didn't overlap the bottom because I wanted it fixed to the foreground, and then I ran it through my Gemini machine in the same way as I've done for previous partial die cutting. When I took it off, obviously I've got a sitting reindeer, and I am going to have to remove those antlers. I need also to reshape the ears, the nose and the knees, but that can easily be done with scissors. So before doing that, I decided I would cut the rest of the frame out, and so I used a square die of the right size and I partially die cut it, making sure that I wasn't going to cut out any of that reindeer because you want the foreground at the bottom to be intact. And I used partial die cutting again with bigger cards and ran it through my Gemini machine. Once I'd done that, then I remodeled into the cow, and here he is sitting in front of the donkey, and I think he looks fairly realistic, and you can do that with any die. The next thing I wanted to show you was the donkey, and again some partial die cutting and how you can use multiple dies in the same scene. So first of all I cut the donkey out with partial die cutting to make sure that his hooves were firmly in the ground and that he wasn't a separate figure, and I ran him through the Gemini machine. And then what I wanted to do was have some grass in front of him. The eagle-eyed will spot that I've actually got him back to front, which was very silly. I didn't notice till the end, but as it turned turned out it didn't matter. I put my grass die across, partially die cutting just the very edge, and again I wanted it to be connected to the foreground, so I didn't want to overlap. And when I took it out, I'd got my grass admittedly back to front, but it didn't matter, and the donkey is there. And then I cut out the rest of the foreground. And meanwhile, of course, I've got to make the frame in the same way I did for the oxen. So I took my square die again. I wanted a 2 centimetre border either side. I did not want to cut any of the donkey. So once again, I partially die cut using large cards, building them up. And this time, another hint is that if you don't have enough cards, you can use your shim to act as another bit of pressure, which I did for this particular instance. Now, as you can see, this didn't go terribly well. It's not particularly straight, but because it's an inner panel, it's not going to matter too much. I wanted to cut out a straight corner, so I used small cards to do that, and as you can see, the net result is I've only got to scissor away a small bit at the base, and the rest of it forms the frame that I wanted, and here he is cut out and ready to roll. I carry on in the same way with the next frame. So the one with the shepherd and the sheep and the grass, that's 3 different dies, all partially die cut, and then I use the square frame die to create the frame and free cut the bottom part of the scene. With the kings, then I've got half a camel in the actual die as a whole camel, but I've partially die cut him. The kings are partially die cut, and I've free cut the ground so it makes it undulating, and I just build up the panels. Now I do like now to do tunnel boxes using single hinges between 2 panels, and they are mountain and 2 valley folds. They spring nicely, they hold everything straight, and it's very easy to assemble the whole thing in a modular fashion, and you can slot in more panels depending on what you want. To make the hinges, I score across a sheet of A4 card at 1.5 centimetre intervals right the way along. And then once I've done that, I cut with my guillotine every 4 lines, which enables me to do 2 valley folds and 1 mountain fold. The first fold is going to be the mountain one here in the middle, and I just fold the card in half and then burnish. I use a spoon, you could use a bone folder. Flatten out the card again on the opposite side and do the valley folds up from the outer edges. And again, I use my spoon to burnish. Very easy then to fold, and your hinge is ready to use. So the next thing to do is I'm going to have to stick the hinges between the scenes to make the book. Now you may have noticed that my margin here is only 1 centimetre in both sides, whereas I've made the hinges 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch. You might be wondering why I do that. I find that if you go down to 1 centimetre for a hinge, you don't bend that easily. I don't mean when you're scoring, I mean when you're trying to put your book flat, and having a slightly wider hinge is better. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm still only going to stick it to the edge there. I don't want it to overlap my camel. So I will have a tiny amount of paper over the edge, but actually that gives a border and it's quite fine. I quite like it. So that's why I do it. There's nothing to stop you doing 1 centimetre hinges, but I do find them that they really don't fold flat so easily. So I'm going to stick a hinge on that side and make sure that your mountain fold faces into your picture. And I will do exactly the same on the other side with another hinge, just sticking to the edge, making sure it's straight. And the other thing to say is I don't think this is good for double-sided tape. Of course you can use it, but you're making this as a keepsake, and double-sided tape I've found tends to lose its stick after a little while, and you're better off using a decent glue instead. I've stuck the hinges on both sides, and I've got the mountain folds facing the middle, and they will just go down like that. And I need to complete this particular module by sticking the next piece on top. Remember, I'm going from back to front. Now, as I said before, you only need to, you leave a 1/2 centimetre border, and so I am going to just put some glue firstly on one side along the edge here, and then I'll put some on the edge there, but I'm going to stick this one first so I can position it accurately so that I know that when I bring that through, the distance to bring it, and make sure that it keeps it straight. Keeping the tunnel book straight at this stage is quite important, because otherwise you're going to get a skew when you press your book down. So once I've stuck all my modules in the same way, so I've got them in pairs, you don't have to have even numbers, but I just find it easier to assemble if I make a module, and I happen to have 8 panels, so that's fine. So these are the 2 back ones, and then in front of that go my kings, and obviously they'll be raised in a minute because I have to attach each module. And then in front of that I've got my shepherd, sheep and donkey, and then in front of that I've got the oxen and the front piece. And now what I need to do is put the same hinge concertina panels between the modules. So I've stuck my first hinge on the side, and of course this time you can match up your valley pieces together so that that keeps you reasonably straight. I'm not sure I always get it completely straight, and then just burnish it down again. I've done it with my trusty spoon. You could do it with your bone scraper, whatever tool you like, or your hands, and just leave that to stick firmly in place. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side before positioning the module that goes in front on top, like that. So once you've put all your modules together, you get this beautiful scene, and this is the back, and I will be making a light box and putting some vellum over it so that the light shines through the scene. As you can see, all the joints have been stuck together, and the great thing about this module system is the fact that you can line up your mountain folds together to make sure it's lovely and straight so it goes together. I find it much easier than scoring a whole sheet of A4 and trying to stick the scenes in place. This system works really well. So I've put them all together, and here is the scene. Now you can see that I've cut out some grass, which I've put in front of the oxen and the front of the stage, because I think that enhances the scene somewhat. I have cut out little tiny stars from all different shapes and sizes, or different sizes, from a holographic card to catch the light, because obviously the yellow light from the LED will shine through the big star. And then I want to decorate the bottom. And what I've done is I've cut out some holly from white card, and it's a nice die, but obviously it's one way. So another hint would be that to make a matching pair, cut out another set and then heat emboss on the reverse side a couple of times, and if you just heat emboss once on the front side, you'll barely notice any difference between the two of them. I've used a sparkly clear heat embossing for my pair, and they make a very pretty embellishment on the front of the tunnel box, and it's a great way of utilising your dies as creatively as you can. Now once it's all assembled, you can see that those modules give a lovely easy squash effect, springs back beautifully. And now I'm onto the light box, where I've put some gold vellum on the back of my scene for the LED light to shine through, and that's going to look very pretty. So to make the light box at the back, I've taken some A4 card and I have cut it to 2 centimetres greater in all directions than the tunnel book itself, and then I've scored 1 centimetre lines at 1 centimetre from the edge and 2 centimetres from the edge, again all the way round. Then I've cut out little rectangles on the corner pieces, and I do that at all 4 corners, and then make a little slice down to the corner so that that flap becomes the tab with which I can stick the box together. So once you've cut out all the corners and slit horizontally up to the corner of the main box, you can start folding. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to fold the inner lines first and then the outer lines, and they're both going to be valley folds because then it'll overlap to give me something to stick on the back. So once you've folded everything, you bring up the sides And I've just trimmed these corner pieces very slightly so that they sit, because they're going to be the bits that you stick together like that, and then the tops like that on all four corners. So you will end up with a nice box with a flat surface that you can stick to the back of your scene. I peg the corners just to hold it in place while the glue's drying. Use all-purpose glue. And when it's dry, I'll just take out the pegs. And my box is complete, apart from putting the lights in and also a hole, because it's going to go out the back of the tunnel book. Although the box is complete, I won't actually stick it in place until I've done the book binding part of this project, which I will go through in my next tutorial. But for now, your actual tunnel book scene is complete and you're ready to make it into that final keepsake. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you want to know how I do the rest, then join me in the next part. Thank you so much for watching.